He never owned a phone or traveled north of the Georgia state line, but when he died alone in his cabin, he gave the city one of its greatest gifts, hundreds of acres of pristine wilderness. Here to tell us about it is Tim Gilmore, author of The Wilderness and Willie Brown. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Ann.
So, this is a fascinating history, both of Willie Brown himself
Mm.
as a person, but also the place and the time that
Mhm.
he
Mhm.
inhabited. And his life story is just really extraordinary.
It is, as you said, he never had a phone, never had electricity, never had running water. I
This
ha
was a man who died in 1970.
not
It's not
died
like
in
he was yeah.
Right, yeah, not like he, lived in he was born in the 1800s actually, but yeah, died in 1970, gave hundreds of acres to the Nature Conservancy. He had this, kind of feeling that the land that he lived on was, like he had this kind of, certain responsibility to take care of it and, to pass it on, that he was part of it, but also that it was something that people needed, a not just a place, but this particular place. There's a kind of magical quality to it.
And this is for people who aren't familiar, this is the Theodore Roosevelt area of the Timucuan Preserve
Exactly.
in
Yep.
kind of North Jacksonville, and his land is on
It
what was
it's
actually St. John's Bluff, the bluff.
Yeah, it's right off of Fort Caroline Road and close to Fort Caroline. And as you said, the Theodore Roosevelt area. He loved Theodore Roosevelt because of the conservation thing. So it's yeah, lots of thousands of people hike these trails every year. One of them is the Willie Brown Trail. Some people think of all of the trails as the Willie Brown Trails. Some people, whom I know, go out and have coffee at dawn with Willie Brown sometimes. Still, 54 years, almost 55 years later, people still have a real connection to him, and they did when he was alive, certainly. And I kind of love the irony of that. At the Earlier, you referred to him as a hermit. I have to tell you, I took some backlash for calling him a hermit early on when I was doing some research. People are weirdly, well, not weirdly, but people are very defensive of Willie Brown. And I had people tell me, people who remembered him or people whose parents knew him, that hermit the word hermit has certain connotations, and that actually Willie Brown loved people and people came out to see him all the time. And this place was more remote then, much more remote then than it is now. And it wasn't necessarily easy to get to, but people knew where his cabin was. People came out to see him. People brought him food. People brought him wedding cake. There's one story of people who left a wedding reception to with several of their friends to drive across town, go out to Willie Brown's cabin at night,
And deliver this.
and bring him some wedding cake. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
I mean, so maybe people don't like the term hermit, but to be clear, he did
Yes.
live in this cabin, very isolated,
Mhm.
no trespassing signs around it to keep
Right.
hunters away.
Correct.
Um,
Yep.
and it was a very humble
Mhm.
abode, I guess you
Mhm.
could say. It
Mhm.
had a single light, no running water.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, when when he was alive and when he died, the word hermit was in lots of headlines. I mean, lots of people would call him a hermit, but I do think it's particularly interesting that a lot of people more than half a century later took exception.
He's a
And
very sociable hermit.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about his childhood because
Mm,
it's very shocking, some of it.
mm.
He has lived on this property or he lived on this land since he was 6 months old. It was always very remote, but much more so then than it is today. And he basically was, is it fair to say that he was sort of abandoned with his brother on this property when he was 12 years old?
So I'm really interested in how mythologies develop, and trying to track the actual histories that connect or sometimes don't connect with those mythologies. And yeah, really kind of into. So he's born in the late 1800s, And really into the 1950s, this kind of mythos started developing around him. He didn't foster it or anything, but it just kind of naturally started happening. Um, there are inconsistencies in, the actual records about when he was living there and how, but his parents came down from New York. His father was a lawyer in New York, and they came to Jacksonville, and kind of the official-ish story is that they looked for a place out of town during some of the yellow fever epidemics that were happening, and so
And they lost a couple children to that.
they did, yeah, daughters, one of whom, nobody really knows her name or where she is or anything. Still,
Where she's buried.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right, yeah, where she's buried, right. So the mythos is that he lived on this land since he was an infant. That he and his brother Saxon was his brother's name. Took care of the land on their own, and Saxon died in the 1950s, and then it was Willie's responsibility to take care of the land and pass it on to the people.
But in your reporting, which is extensive for this book, we should say, I mean, it involves all kinds of interviews that you did, archival records, letters, but the family, the parents, after losing these 2 daughters to yellow fever, basically moved back to Jacksonville and lived in a kind of lavish downtown hotel while the boys remained there in this cabin.
Um, they They did stay, downtown more. They were in, a hotel for a small period of time, but they did stay downtown more and leave the boys out, and, it's actually hard to tell, and I actually had a lot of fun trying to track what actually was happening with what kind of structure they lived in. There was a large house that was there before them. There was a fire at some point. They rebuilt part of the house. They built a big barn. They lived in part of the barn. And finally, after both of the parents died, Willie and Saxon built this one room cabin. And when Saxon died, Willie Brown stayed on in that one room cabin, and that became, the place that people associated with him.
Now, it's pretty clear to know what would have happened to this property had it not been preserved because
Right?
literally all you have to do is walk or drive,
Yeah.
a few short blocks really
Yeah.
away and
Yeah.
you're just in the heart of Arlington.
Yeah, this would have been prime real estate, absolutely, and it really is. What I love about the Theodore Roosevelt area. I mean, there's a lot that I love, but I love the fact that it is both representative of the natural systems here, but it's also unique at the same time. Both of those things, and there are several ecosystems in the area there. There are hardwood hammocks. There's marshes. There's these high bluffs, and there are extensive shell middens that were left by the Timucuans thousands of years ago that run throughout the area. It actually has really fascinating history outside of Willie Brown's even being there.
Sure, because it has thousands of years of indigenous history that predated
It
anybody
it
with the last name
does.
Brown. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And and there were a number of archaeological excavations during his lifetime. He would let archaeologists from the University of Florida come in, and he would participate in the digs and everything. He had a real understanding that wilderness. We think of wilderness as being like virgin land or something, but that wilderness is really rarely untouched.
Mm.
So also ironies. People think of Willie Brown the way they think of, Henry David Thoreau or something like that. On Walden Pond. He wasn't his place was not pristine. he had some streetcars out there
Yeah.
that he actually were full of books. Uh, he had lots of junk around. He wasn't a neat guy. There are some really interesting letters early on when his father is in the city, and he's writing to Willie in particular. And he says things like, get the place cleaned up. Your mother's going to be coming to stay. There's one letter in particular that says, your mother's coming, get rid of the rats. And so, so,
That's good advice for any boy out
I
there.
suppose so. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if you're just joining us, we're talking to Tim Gilmore. He is the author of 25 some books. His newest is called The Wilderness and Willie Brown. It's about a local resident who bequeathed his land to the Nature Conservancy in 1970. We have a question from Susan on Facebook. She
Mm.
says, "Can the land ever be developed, or is it protected
Ooh.
forever?"
It, it is protected forever. Hopefully, I mean, the question is forever, forever. I mean, right when I was finishing up this the research for this book, we saw this possibility of um, developing some of the preserved parklands in Florida, for golf courses, and that was something that was floated, um, and thankfully quickly shot down. It is protected. It is, run by the Park Service, but I don't think we can. I don't think we can take anything for granted. You know.
Yeah. He didn't either. I mean, there's a great quote from him where he said that there will come a day when there will be nothing but a concrete
Mm,
jungle from New York City to Jacksonville. And
mhm.
um, sadly, a lot of that is true. But let's
Yeah.
talk about this book. You're doing a reading coming up
Mhm.
of the book. Tell us what that event is going to entail.
Absolutely. So I'm so thankful to Old Arlington Incorporated for hosting this. It is Thursday. Doors open at 6. It's at the Unitarian Universalist Church on Arlington Expressway, which I just have to real quickly say is a masterpiece architecturally by Robert Broward, and a really fitting place to have something like this celebrating Willie Brown. I'll have a presentation. I'll read a little bit. I'll tell some people some interesting things about Willie Brown, and sell some books. And I think it will be a wonderful night.
And you've got some great photos of Willie Brown. We've been showing some of them here
Mm.
as we've been talking, but he is an extraordinary looking guy,
Oh yeah, he was always.
pencil thin, kind of
That's
a
right.
1,000 feet tall. How tall was he?
Yeah.
I mean, you're pretty tall too.
Yeah. Well, not as tall as he looked because he was so thin, but he really had this philosophy, if you can call it a philosophy, but it's of simplicity, of not taking more than you needed.
Or
Uh,
perhaps showers.
that could be, yeah. But when he left his land of the Nature Conservancy, and then and died the year after that in 1970, it also met this historic moment where young people were very interested in the environment, and Earth Day was a new thing, and um, yeah, he really, he received letters from all over the place thanking him for this, and became this kind of surprising hero.
Well, it is a fascinating book. Tim Gilmore, we love talking to you about all your projects. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you for having me.